People are crying out for affordable, high-quality laptops. Stuff that doesn't break the bank, but that also doesn't feel like a kid's toy, and that doesn't slow to a crawl at the sight of a multi-tab spreadsheet. Geekom's latest 16-inch device offers a modern, high-performance CPU, robust integrated graphics, and 16GB of fast LPDDR5 for less than $900. Moreover, Geekom claims that the Intel Meteor Lake CPU performs almost as well on battery as on mains power, a typical weak spot for Windows laptops, and that it can operate for up to 24 hours on a charge. Have Geekom managed to strike the right balance? Or is the M16 dead on arrival? Geekom sent the Geekbook M16 to review free of charge, so I have flagged the video as containing product placement, but this is a review and not a sponsored promotion. There will be a link to the M16 below should you decide it's the right laptop for you, and a discount code to get 12% off the list price. However, I don't earn any money from your click. As you can probably guess from the wallpaper in the marketing materials, the Geekbook M16 is aiming for the same category of users as the MacBooks and Dell XPSs of the world, with a slim CNC aluminium unibody chassis that weighs just under 4 pounds or around 1700 grams and measures 0.66 inches or 17 millimeters thick. The rigidity of the body is excellent, there's very little flex to any part of the device, and it feels like a durable bit of kit. However, this is a $900 laptop in a time where prices are rising across the board, so there are compromises. Thankfully, the compromises that affect performance are pretty reasonable. At the heart of the M16 is a 16-core, 22-thread Intel Core Ultra 9 185H from late 2023, which breaks down as 6 full-fat P cores, 8 slower, more battery-efficient E cores, and 2 low-power E cores. It's this hybrid big-little core architecture that helps the M16 to achieve Geekom's long battery life claims, with the big cores kicking in when there's work to be done and the smaller ones taking over during peacetime. The clock frequencies in the specs are kinda irrelevant in this context, as the CPU's being configured with a 55-watt TDP, 10 watts higher than the nominal rating according to Intel, but 60 watts below the maximum the silicon's capable of, so clock speeds will vary according to the workload and the available power and temperatures. Like all Intel CPUs of this generation, it has their ARC-branded integrated graphics. The highlight feature of this iGPU is Intel QuickSync, allowing hardware encoding and decoding of a wide range of video formats for both media consumption and content creation. It also has some degree of gaming chops, though don't expect too much. This chip is a couple of generations old, and while it does theoretically supports stuff like ray tracing, it doesn't support Intel XMX. This means no machine learning XeSS upscaling or frame generation, so I'd be more inclined to recommend it for nothing more demanding than some lightweight esports, indies, and older AA and AAA games. The display is also not particularly gaming focused, being a 16x10 IPS panel with a resolution of 1920x1200 and a 60Hz refresh rate. Viewing angles and colour are decent as you'd expect from a modern IPS, but with a peak brightness of 300 nits, it's not true HDR certified. The stereo speakers are downward firing, which makes sense in a laptop of this form factor, and they sound good even cranked up to their maximum. Sound quality is also excellent coming from the 3.5mm audio jack, though my Hi-Fi Man HE400SEs could probably benefit from a headphone amp as the max volume wasn't particularly impressive. Still, compared to my Razer Blade 2020, the quality from this audio jack is actually a lot better, and I'm glad to see it's still here, when it could quite easily have ended up on the chopping block when Geekom were looking to keep costs down. Likewise, the rest of the I/O is enough to make any MacBook Neo owner jealous. The M16 includes two Type-C ports, one labelled as 40GB USB 4, the other simply called Full Function USB-C, which seems to perform pretty close to the USB 4 port in terms of data transfer, and is also the method for charging the laptop. There are two Type-A ports on the right hand side to save you from needing a dongle for plugging in a simple flash drive or external mouse. On the left side there's also a full-size HDMI 2 port, which along with the two Type-C ports means for up to 4 displays in total, and Geekom have included a USB 4 docking station in the box that adds a couple more Type-A's, a Type-C pass-through, an Ethernet port and another HDMI port. All that's missing are a couple of more niche connectors. I think an Oculink port would have been a nice inclusion that would elevate the M16 over some of the competition, especially as most big name brands tend to prefer Thunderbolt or proprietary connectors for docking laptops to external GPUs. Also, what the hell, Geekom? I was always glad to see your mini PCs never did away with the full-size SD card slot on the side. So where is it on your laptops? Geekom have made use of the 16-inch chassis to cram in a keyboard with a number pad and a large trackpad. The trackpad is smooth and accurate enough, but the clicky mechanism feels a little less premium than the laptops I've used in the past. Taking the price point into account, I think it's about as good as I'd expect, but it doesn't mesh with the otherwise quite premium feel of the M16. The typing experience wasn't bad, but the layout requires some getting used to. For one thing, it's a US layout, so I don't have an easy way of typing the British currency unit, and the quotation mark and @ symbol are in the wrong places, but that's not the laptop's fault. The spacing on the keys is just different enough from the stuff I'm used to that my typo rate is a lot higher than usual, and I'm constantly hitting numlock instead of backspace. The overlap between the arrow keys and numpad also means I occasionally unironically find myself typing 1111 for no reason, and not simply because I forgot to hold down the shift key in my insane Twitter rant. But I think these are all me problems, and I'm sure I'll get used to them in time. The bottom cover is attached by 9 Torx T5 hex screws, and after a fair amount of prying and some frankly distressing levels of noise, we have access to the only upgradable part of the system, the SSD. There's an empty slot for a 30mm M.2 drive, and the pre-installed 80mm one can be removed easily enough and upgraded if you happen to win the lottery or something. Speaking of which, the RAM is soldered, which, while good news for performance, does mean that you won't be able to upgrade it in some hypothetical future when memory prices are more sensible, or sell it for rent money if things get really rough. According to Geekom's own tests, the 99.9 watt-hour battery can hold up for 24 hours at idle, with the display operating at around 42% brightness, and running a 1080p video with the display turned up to 63, it can apparently still maintain a charge for 17.5 hours. In my own testing, while watching YouTube videos for 7 hours, the battery discharged by about 51%. Running the Cinebench 24 benchmark for 10 minutes used 12% of the battery, and the 3D Mark Time Spy test suite used 4%. The supplied 100 watt PD charger took the battery from just over 10% to 95% charge in about 95 minutes. And that was while I was capturing the benchmark and gameplay footage for this video, so left idle it could charge even faster. As Geekom is claiming, the M16 has not only got great battery life, but can also maintain performance away from mains power, it made sense for me to run the benchmarks both plugged in and unplugged. Cinebench 24 scores 798 points on mains, and only lost about 10% of that power when running on battery. The Intel CPU is capable of running about 20% faster than this when used in a desktop machine, as can be seen in the mini PC benchmark results, but the laptop is doing this under much more severe thermal and power restrictions, so some drop in performance was to be expected. Geekbench 6 meanwhile decided to heavily throttle back the CPU when I unplugged the laptop, and while the single-core score was basically unaffected, the multi-threaded score dropped by over a third. The Geekbench graphics tests were a little less conservative, cutting performance by 10 to 20% depending on whether using OpenCL or Vulkan. Geekbench AI is a thing that exists now, and while I don't have any wider context for what these numbers mean in the real world, I can tell you that the M16 will take about 10 to 20% longer to perform local AI tasks on battery than on mains power. 3D Mark Time Spy is a DX12 benchmark that's getting on a bit now, but has been very popular over the years, and the Intel CPU holds up very well on battery, only losing about 5% performance. Steel Nomad Lite is emulating the kind of games one might expect to play on a device without a graphics card, and that sees a slightly bigger drop of 11% compared to mains power. Also, for my one real-world productivity test, I set up a 5-minute 4K 60fps timeline in the free edition of Davinci Resolve, which was mostly very smooth and easy to work with, only experiencing slowdown the first time I started applying highlight and contrast adjustments. Resolve's free edition usually can't use GPU hardware acceleration, but it makes an exception for Intel QuickSync, and it completed the H265 render in 5 minutes 10 seconds on mains. Unplugging it only saw that time extended to 5 minutes 37, a less than 10% increase. In gaming, results were mixed. On the one hand, 2D indies like Hades 2 will run like a dream. In the first boss fight, I clocked around 155 FPS, with batteries slightly outperforming mains power on average, but also seeing more inconsistent frame times, and that would become a running theme. GTA 5 Enhanced, meanwhile, is just about playable without using upscaling, producing around 45 FPS at 1200p minimum, but again, playing away from mains power saw some absolutely terrible percentile lows. Baldur's Gate 3 was way too heavy for this iGPU, and I had to use XeSS balanced upscaling, equivalent to FSR performance, to get even 30 FPS. Though arguably that's not exactly unplayable in a turn-based RPG. Finally, I tried some bot matches in Counter-Strike 2, and again there was a curious boost to performance on average when running purely on battery, but 0.1% lows were in the gutter. If you have your mains adapter handy, you should be able to get a decent casual experience out of the M16, but the display alone is certainly not up to the standards of esports gamers, much less the integrated graphics. Despite its slim form factor and the fairly hefty CPU on board, the M16 actually manages to keep noise and temperatures pretty much under control. In a Cinebench run, the CPU can spike up to 102 degrees, but the average after 10 minutes is below 80, and that's even in the 28-degree ambient of my living room. Remember, I'm British, we don't believe in air conditioning. Fan noise at these temps is audible, but barely an inconvenience, registering somewhere around 34 decibels from a noise floor of around 24 decibels. My Razer Blade sounds worse than this at idle. There's plenty to like about the Geekbook M16. The laptop itself looks and feels premium, for the most part. The Ultra 9 CPU has more than enough horsepower to deal with moderate productivity and everyday use case scenarios. The range of I/O is decent, and of course the battery life is outstanding. The display is only okay, and 16GB of RAM as the only option is a little disappointing, but in the context of RAM shortages, I'm not entirely surprised, and it's better than some alternatives I could mention. I only hope that Geekom can maintain supply, and that they're able to keep the price where it is. The retail price is $899 US, which, at the time of recording, is lower than most other Ultra 9 powered laptops, The extra 12% discount makes it perhaps one of the cheapest laptops in its class, and the fact that it can make that claim without resorting to using cheap plastic build quality, TN panel displays and small batteries is worth celebrating. Let's just hope it stays that way. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.